Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome. As I know many of you are joining from all over the world today. Welcome to Talent Smart's webinar on how to use emotional intelligence during challenging times, EQ skills to offer self-rescue. Before I introduce our team at Talent Smart and specifically our presenters today who will be facilitating, I'd like to take care of a few quick housekeeping items. For those of you who are not familiar with the GoToWebinar system, you should see a panel on your right-hand side, which is your GoToWebinar panel. And today's webinar will run for approximately 45 minutes. We will be covering about 30 to 40 minutes or so of content and then a Q&A or question and answer session at the end. Today's webinar will be recorded as well. So for anybody who hops on late or anybody who needs to hop off early, no worries. You will receive a recording of today's webinar via email, and you'll receive that to the email that you registered with about 1 hour after today's webinar completes. So keep an eye out for that. Additionally, there will be a survey at the end of the webinar that will populate as soon as we close out the webinar. These surveys really help us continue making these webinars better and better, and they provide us feedback to help us continue doing them moving forward. So it's about 5 quick questions, and we really do appreciate that feedback if you could provide that. So please go ahead and fill out that survey once we end today's webinar. And as I shared, we will be doing a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. So at any time today that you do have questions, feel free to type them right into that question box that you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. So on your GoToWebinar panel, you should see a little arrow that says questions. If you click on that arrow, it should drop down a text box for you, and you can just type your question in at any point, and we will devote a portion at the end of today's webinar to circle back and try to answer as many of those for you as we can. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our team and Talent Smart. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Talent Smart is the world's premier provider of emotional intelligence training, certification, assessments, and coaching. And we've been in business for almost 20 years and have serviced over 75% of the Fortune 500 companies, and over 2 million working professionals have relied on our EQ expertise. So throughout today's webinar, if at any time you hear the terms emotional intelligence and EQ, keep in mind that we are talking about the same thing. We're using them synonymously, and just know that we're speaking of emotional intelligence when we use those two terms, EQ or emotional intelligence. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Talent Smart, you might also be familiar with our book that you should see on the right-hand side of your screen right here, Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It's a #1 bestseller, and we've sold almost 3 million copies, and you might have seen it at any major book retailer, on Amazon, or at any Hudson News store at any major airport. So you might be familiar with that title as well. So I would love to introduce our team very quickly before we jump into today's content. My name is Kate Barsby. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Talent Smart, and I will be serving as the technical producer for today's webinar. Additionally, we will have Sue DeLazaro, our Vice President of Programs at Talent Smart. She will be our host and our subject matter expert, and also joining her will be Dr. Sherry Duchak, who is the Director of Training at Talent Smart, and she'll be a co-host as well. Sue will be joining us from Maryland, and Sherry is actually joining us from sunny San Diego, and I, Kate, am joining us from Philadelphia. So without further ado, I would love to introduce both Sue and Sherry. Sue, Sherry, can you hear me?
Hi, this is Sue DeLazaro, and yes, I can hear you. Thanks for having me.
And this is Sherry, and I can hear you too, Kate.
Great, thanks so much. We're really excited to jump in and get started with today's webinar on using EQ to manage emotions during challenging times. So Sue, why don't you take it away and we can get started and share what we're going to be covering.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much. So with everything that's going on right now in our world, we are faced with so much change. And with this change comes stress. And if we allow this stress to build and build, it can happen that our emotions just take over. So today we'd like to offer some simple self-care strategies and things that you can do when you're feeling overwhelmed. So today we are going to define what it means to be overwhelmed and how this differs from kind of the normal stress that we feel. We'll share physical and social symptoms, as well as how the effects are on our health and our ability to work. Next, we're going to talk about 3 common tendencies that are actually kind of self-harming that we end up gravitating toward when we're faced with feeling emotionally overwhelmed. Finally, we will be sharing 3 very simple EQ strategies that can help you combat these 3 tendencies that are just human nature. All right, so without further ado, Sherry, should we get started?
Absolutely, Sue.
Okay.
The first thing I'd like to do is check in with everyone participating today so that we can learn from each other. So let's take a quick pulse on our own experiences with strong feelings. I want to get a sense from each other how many of us over the course of the last month or so have felt at least one of the following symptoms that Kate will share right now in our poll.
Great, thanks so much, Sherry. So everyone, you should see a poll pop up on your screen momentarily, and go ahead and select any of those 4 options. So which of the symptoms have you experienced the most frequently in the recent weeks? Please select one of the following. Maybe you feel sick or exhausted, or you can't focus on basic tasks. Maybe you've been overreacting to a small mishap or an event, or you've been withdrawing, or you want to withdraw from others. So go ahead and select your choice there. I am seeing a bunch of answers coming in, so thank you so much. We'll just give it another moment or so. And I do see some answers still coming in, so go ahead and select your choice. And we're going to go ahead and close this poll, and then I'm going to share the results with everybody. So this is interesting. Sherry and Sue, we're seeing that the predominant group is actually not able to focus on basic tasks, but then right after that, 26% have seen that they've been overreacting to a small mishap or event, and then some have been actually been feeling it physically, where they've been feeling sick or exhausted, and then some have been withdrawing or wanted to withdraw from others. So not a huge difference. We're seeing kind of across the board, there's not a huge discrepancy between these percentages.
Thank you, Kate. And, I have to say I've been smiling on my end because it's really interesting and not surprising to me. If I had done the poll, I would have been torn because I've experienced all 4. So not surprising at all that we're seeing it across the board, because the last few months have created circumstances that have led to a range of feelings for all of us. And these feelings have had the potential for spilling over not only into our work days, but also into our personal lives. It's helpful to see the results of the poll because it reminds all of us that we're not alone. We're not alone in any of this. My quick example that I can come up with is I normally travel regularly for work, and I normally live on airplanes. And now that I'm working from home and conducting training virtually, it actually took me a while to give myself permission to be tired, because I falsely believed that the lack of being on airplanes and travel and the lack of commuting should leave me really well rested. Even though I work in the field of emotional intelligence, I was discounting the fatigue that comes from a major change in life schedule, and also the overwhelming emotions that we're all dealing with in this turbulent time. It's important to take note of all of our emotions, but some of us are hit harder by certain emotions than others. So the first question for today really is, what is the difference between strong emotions and overwhelming emotions?
So thanks, Sherry. I'd love to clarify that as kind of the beginning part of this day. So feeling overwhelmed occurs, or the feeling of being overwhelmed occurs when emotions flood your body and your mind, and they can feel so intense that you can't effectively manage yourself. So how does this show up? First, our emotions reach a certain degree of intensity, and when that happens, we lose our ability to focus or act or think rationally. Our emotions can consume us, And these overwhelming feelings can make day-to-day life more difficult than ever, even the daily tasks that we're used to.
Absolutely, Sue. And so if you don't mind, how about I share the physical symptoms of overwhelming emotions and how they affect our bodies, and then you can describe the social symptoms to watch out for. So we'll hit both of them.
Okay.
On a physical level, strong negative emotions make us feel tired, weak, and unfocused. Now, when prolonged, such strong emotions even compromise our immune system, and this makes us more likely to get sick, which is particularly problematic during a pandemic. For more clarity on this, let's check out this chart from Deepak Chopra. He's an expert in mindfulness, and his chart maps out how some of the most common emotions resonate in our bodies. So as we look at this, fear, anxiety, guilt, anger, and sorrow, just to name a few, can result in anything from muscle tension to chest pressure to a racing heart and even to sluggishness. So I want everybody right now to think back to when you felt overwhelmed recently, or even just in general, and think about how it sits with you physically when this happens. What are your physical symptoms? I know for me, when I feel overwhelmed, I feel tired and listless even after a full night's sleep. And sometimes I even battle tense back muscles that I always say my headache goes right down into my back or vice versa. So that's how it manifests for me physically.
Okay. So Sherry had just talked about these physical symptoms that we can feel in our bodies. And now I'm going to talk about the kind of the social symptoms that we experience. So extreme emotions hijack our ability to make decisions and think rationally around other people. This can cause us to lash out frequently, react disproportionately, or make hasty decisions that we later regret. The thing to keep in mind that emotions are a signal to our minds to stop and reflect. And, this affects everyone in a social way. But it does so in many different ways. So if you're introverted, chances are when you're feeling overwhelmed, you might have a tendency to withdraw and need frequent or extended breaks from work or life. For others, and for extroverts especially, overwhelming feelings can make you want to talk out loud more with a trusted friend. I as an extrovert can say that I feel that way. I find myself, reacting a little faster, reacting a little more harshly when I feel these unexpected curveballs, and I need to talk to a friend. I need to talk it out.
I'm right there with you, Sue. But for those of you who are experiencing any of these warning signs, physical or social, Sue and I want to share 3 very useful emotional intelligence strategies for self-care in the face of feeling overwhelmed. Now, we want to be clear that these strategies are not about powering through at all costs, because when we ignore what's going on and just, put our heads down to power through, there are going to be negative consequences. Our concentration diminishes, our productivity decreases, our relationships suffer, and our physical and emotional well-being are at risk. So the EQ strategies that we're about to share aren't about powering through, and they aren't even about working at all, but they will help you overcome 3 common but harmful tendencies that we all fall prey to at different times. So we'll address these harmful tendencies and share how emotional intelligence can prepare you to feel your feelings and protect your physical health. But to get us started on this part of the program, Sue, will you touch quickly on the term emotional intelligence, or EQ? I mean, we tend to say it so casually here and so often.
Yep, happy to. So emotional intelligence is a skill set that can help you manage through tough moments, through tough phases, and help you kind of rescue yourself when others might not be able to, frankly. Emotional intelligence is your ability to recognize and understand emotions and your skill at using this awareness to manage yourself and your relationships with others. Now, when you're overwhelmed, high-level EQ skills might be hard to pull off, but the EQ strategies that we'll be sharing today are more basic in nature, but these approaches are simple by design because that's all that we might have bandwidth for right now frequently, and they work. So, and one thing I wanted to mention, the limbic system in our brain is equipped to help us do this. We just have to be able to stop and tell it what to do and where to focus our attentions. Sherry, now might be a good time to talk about these harmful tendencies along with the EQ strategies to rescue these moments.
Certainly, Sue. And I'll take the lead with harmful tendency number 1, which is staying busy to dodge dealing with intense emotions. Now, this tendency is triggered by an inciting incident that stirs up the emotions. The tricky thing is that these inciting incidents can't be predicted, so you can't always avoid them. Once these incidents do stir up the emotions, however, here's the harmful pattern that often follows with many of us. First, you feel flustered, but you quickly try to keep busy to keep your mind off either the incident itself or the feelings or both. Then, with a little time, more shallow thoughts can surface and pester you and cause you to avoid addressing the emotions. So we move into avoidance. So for example, the way this might play out is you might fixate on getting a project done or add a big grocery run that you don't need to avoid something fairly significant and intense that's trying to grab your attention. I'll tell you, growing up, I could always tell when my mom had experienced an inciting incident because she would start cleaning the grout in the kitchen with a toothbrush, and that would become her fixation. But however this fixation manifests for you, if you give in to these shallow thoughts and fixations long enough, what you now discover is you can't concentrate on work or your emotions. And this is the point when there's a potential for those intense emotions to surface unexpectedly and then take over.
Okay, so Sherry, can you please share the strategy? I'm getting stressed looking at this. What can we do to address this?
I am so glad you asked, Sue, because I was getting a little stressed too, and I love that I'm going to share EQ strategy 1, which is one of my favorites, which is simply to rest. And the reason we rest is so that we can return to being able to feel. Because what happens is the emotions exhaust us. And when we're emotionally overwhelmed, our emotions literally overpower our ability to feel the very feelings that are overwhelming us. So it's really ironic in this. The key is to take time off if you can. If you can't totally take time off, at least try to find a way to take more frequent or shorter recharge breaks throughout the day. You know, step outside for 5 minutes, walk around your office building, go downstairs to the kitchen and grab some water. But if these more frequent breaks or time off aren't possible, then carve out a solid chunk of time in the morning or the evening to fully break from the work, from the chores, from social media, and basically from anything that causes you stress. The reason the true rest is so important is that when we're feeling overwhelmed, we are essentially multitasking at all times. Our attention is split between the emotions and the work at hand. And Sue, I have to say, this was a big aha for me. I had discounted that significant emotions put us in a situation of multitasking, even when we think we're only focused on one task. It also explained in part the fatigue that I was feeling from this constant multitasking.
Yeah.
Rest may very well be the only time that you can break that endless, shallow cycling of thoughts and begin to untangle them. So it's a necessary step toward letting the emotions sink in, processing them, and eventually reflecting on and managing them. You know, the big picture is this. Rest is going to enable you to stop the chain reaction that will cause your feelings to explode at those around you. So that's the first harmful tendency and corresponding strategy. Sue, what about harmful tendency number 2?
Okay. Harmful tendency 2 is you try to suppress your emotions or turn your feelings off. I love this quote that's on the screen. Not everything that's faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. The same can be said of emotions. Feelings will exist whether you want them to or not. You know, they are part of our physical being. They happen. And when you suppress them, you're not letting them loose to wreak havoc on your mind and your body. If you're not confronting these emotions, they're going to lead to physical problems that we mentioned before, the ulcers, the migraines, the digestive issues, just to name a few. So you need to do something with them. You can't just suppress them without having a pressure valve. So let's talk about what this strategy is to handle suppressing the emotions. Okay. So the strategy, doesn't that look peaceful, everyone? Don't you want to be there right now? This strategy is help your feelings surface. So in our book that Kate showed a few slides ago, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, we have a slightly different phrase for this strategy. And that strategy name is quit treating your feelings as good or bad. Our emotions simply are. And they're signals trying to grab your attention to tell you something. And so what we're saying here is let them surface. How you practice this is going to be unique to you because we all experience these physical sensations differently. But here are a few tips. Many people find that they're better able to consider their emotions if you're walking, if you're exercising, meditating, even if you're in the shower. Sometimes I get my best ideas in the shower. Whatever your method, the goal will is spending some time to embrace those emotions, and you're not changing them, you're not judging them. The goal is to just acknowledge them and let them pass through so you can really fully hear them and allow them to just be. And just by doing that, everyone, you're going to lower the intensity of the emotion. And by lowering the intensity, it's going to help you kind of get back to work or get back to whatever you're working through in the moment. So I think we should pass this on back to Sherry to talk about our next tendency and strategy.
Thanks, Sue. Harmful tendency 3 is stretching yourself too thin out of obligation. So when your emotional reservoir is already at its limit, which it is when you're feeling overwhelmed, the last thing you want to do is open it to more emotions. During an intense period for you, when it would be healthy to pull away to rest, why is it that so many of us continue to stretch ourselves too thin out of obligation or because we don't want to let others down? Harmful tendency number 3 shows up when we force ourselves to do too much, when we carry all the weight for others, or when we stay in touch with people who are not helpful to us during this period of feeling overwhelmed. You know, when you get off the phone and you realize that was not the person to have a conversation with because you left the call feeling worse than you did when you started. Your reservoir was at its limit and you kept adding to it. There's no reason to add on more or to feel guilty or obligated when you have so much to deal with to begin with. Guilt will just exacerbate the problem and get in the way of your doing the important work of resting and helping your feelings surface that we already mentioned. You're only going to learn if you let those feelings surface. So when your emotional reservoir reaches its limit, the last thing you want to do is add to it. So the strategy to help with this harmful tendency is to shield yourself from people who are not helpful to you and seek those who are. Sue and I were actually just talking about this the other day in our own lives. Just for a short period of time, it's natural to want to pull away, and this isn't a bad thing. When you're overwhelmed, do what you have to in order to shield yourself from the people who don't make you feel good.
Mhm. And, as you shield yourself from a stressful person, the idea is to reach out to someone who can help you fill yourself up again. That person is someone that can just be a sounding board, someone who you can talk things out, or they might just tell you a silly joke and make you feel better, even if it's for a minute. But when you're going through an intense time, it just becomes extra important to protect yourself and choose the people that you talk to and when you talk to them. So to Sherry's point a moment ago, regarding the guilt, if you're protecting yourself from someone, saying that you can't speak at a certain time, that's okay. It really is, because at the end of the day, and it sounds a little silly, but you're saying no to them, but you're buying yourself some time. You're saying yes to yourself. And in the long run, you'll be in a better position in terms of your energy. So let's recap kind of where we're at right now. So we have talked about the 3 harmful tendencies, and here are the 3 strategies that we're recommending. Let's recap here. We've got EQ strategy 1, which was making sure that you rest to allow yourself to feel. EQ strategy 2 is to help your feelings surface. That's kind of giving yourself space to do that. And EQ strategy 3 is shielding yourself from the people who are not helpful right now and to seek out people who are. So we want you to keep these EQ strategies in your back pocket. There are initial steps you can take to help you grapple with the intense emotions that we are all feeling today. We're just human and we're just all in this together. So when you think about these strategies, maybe one is really resonating with you and you can just practice one of them, or you can try to practice all 3. But at the end of the day, these 3 strategies will help you feel more aware and also help you manage these emotions and the feelings of being overwhelmed.
Sue, I really appreciate you summing those strategies up so succinctly. As a visual learner myself, I always like to see things like that. And, doing this webinar with you definitely reminds me to keep those strategies in mind for myself over the next year. It's always a bonus when you work in a field that reminds you what you need to do to be more effective and productive too. Something else to keep in mind for all of us comes from the poet Audre Lorde, who said, "Our feelings are our most genuine paths to knowledge." In other words, our pain today really becomes our wisdom in the future. So by paying attention to your feelings in doses that you can prepare yourself to handle, of course, you might be surprised what you learn long term, because it's through really understanding our feelings. We like to say using our feelings as data, so to speak, and making sense of what they're trying to tell us, that we have significant new insights in how to operate and how to interact with others and what to do for our own self-care. So these insights help us cope in the present, and they also create meaning for our lives going forward from this day on. So for any further clarification, Kate, do we have time for a few questions?
Yes, thanks so much, Sue and Sherry, for sharing both, all those 3 tendencies. I too find myself guilty, actually, of all 3 of those at different moments. Additionally, the 3 EQ strategies are definitely something that, whether it's practicing 1, as Sue shared, or even practicing 3, I think can all definitely help us, especially during a challenging moment globally, I think that we're all experiencing right now. So we are right at about the 30-minute mark, and I have seen a bunch of questions come in the GoToWebinar panel, so I would love to take a moment and try to plug through as many of those as we can. And I did get a great comment from April. Thanks so much. I remember this quote as well: life is 10% what happens and 90% of how we react to it. So that's I've heard that many a times, and that's such a great quote to think about right now, because it really resonates with the topic that we're covering today. Additionally, I did get a few questions just about the survey that will be coming to you once this webinar completes. So once we close out the webinar, keep an eye out for that survey. That you'll get that at the very end. Additionally, we had somebody that has asked, can you speak a little bit about the difference between shielding ourselves from people who don't help versus surrounding ourselves with only people who only give us praise? So that's actually, it's a very fine line, and it's a great point. So it's asking, is it helpful to be around people that only praise us? So Sherry, can you help us answer that one?
Absolutely, Kate, and it is a great question. And I think it's about redefining support. Support is not synonymous with praise. So we're not suggesting that you only surround yourself with people who praise you or agree with you, but we are suggesting that those toxic people in your life who constantly find problems and negativity or criticize are the ones we want to shield from. But we can open up that group of supportive people to those who are willing to challenge us and question us and ask us to look deeper as well. So support doesn't just mean praise, it just means people who lift you up in some way, even if that's helping you grow versus tearing you down.
That's a good distinction,
Great.
Sherry.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sherry. Sue, I have a question that I'd love to pose to you, if I may. What
Please.
is your advice for someone whose coworker seems overwhelmed? So how do you navigate, reaching out to that person, navigating any time that maybe they're guilty of one of these tendencies of lashing out or even withdrawing? What is the advice for handling a coworker that you can tell seems overwhelmed?
So this might be oversimplified, so if I'm not answering it properly, I hope the person who answered the question or who asked the question can kind of let me know if I'm sharing something helpful. But I would honestly do something as simple as saying, hey, I listened to this webinar. It's about, managing stress right now and in our challenging times. And I heard a couple of strategies that I thought were really helpful, and share the strategies. Honestly, I think everyone's trying to sort of figure out how to make sense out of this moment that we're all in. And we don't all have the answers. So I know I appreciate hearing, getting a good article or getting a nice something or other, some bullets from someone. So it could be as simple as just sharing what you've heard today. And I think that this is a shareable webinar. Is that right, Kate?
Yes, it definitely is.
Okay.
We will be providing, that will actually be on our Talent Smart website. So feel free to share that link with your colleagues, and they'll definitely be able to register and watch the recording on there. We'll be adding that after today.
Okay.
I do have another question.
Oh, go ahead.
And feel free, either one of you, feel free to tackle this one. These techniques seem very valuable and require some time. That's a great point, because they do require time. It's conscious practice. What are some immediate, in-the-moment techniques that may create space and time for the deeper techniques?
I'll go ahead and start, Sue, and if you want to add on to this, that would be great. I think in the immediate time, we have to focus on very small steps. So I think of small steps as taking a deep breath. I think of small steps in terms of something that you can do in just a few seconds to buy yourself the time to then implement some of these larger techniques. So when I feel, I'll give an example from my own life. Overwhelm is something that I know that I've had to do a lot of work on. And as soon as I start to feel overwhelmed, before I can get to the larger techniques, I have a 3-step process. My first one is stop. And what I mean by stop is I literally, wherever I am, I stand up and plant my feet on both, plant my weight on both feet so that I'm balanced. And as soon as I balance, then I breathe. And then for me, I move. And that could just be walking from my office to my kitchen. It could be running, going to the restroom, but any movement kind of clears my head a little. And then after those small steps, I can identify one small piece of the puzzle that I can tackle to keep me from feeling overwhelmed. So whatever resonates with you is a very short step, whether it's breathing, moving, stopping, standing. That's where I always find the avenue to then look at the ones that take more time.
Yeah. Sherry, that was great. And I would just say, if I had to add to that, is that I think our tendency is to just plow through our to-do list, plow through our inbox, go from meeting to meeting to meeting. And I think that it's okay to give ourselves a little bit of permission for a minute or 5 minutes. I go outside and I'll take a walk around my house, just to, check on the tomatoes or whatever it is, but just to break the cycle that you're in. If it's sitting looking at your computer, do something different. And I think that can be helpful to these larger strategies we're sharing.
Great. Another great question that is probably something that a lot of us are dealing with literally right now. Sue, I would love to pose this to you, if I may. Any advice if during these times of staying at home, what if your spouse is having a harder time with work and other stress, and you can't really shield yourself much, but you also want to be able to help them? Another question that actually came in was about managers, and it was that managers often have to have tough conversations with employees, and these employees could be some of those people that are causing them to feel overwhelmed. So you can't shield yourself from that person who's feeling overwhelmed, and maybe that overwhelming feeling is becoming a little bit contagious, but how do you still offer that support? So how do you balance that? Both really good questions.
So how do you offer support without totally absorbing it?
Yeah.
I think that's my paraphrase. Sherry, I might need your help on this one. I'll take a stab at this, but I think my initial thought is, I try to think of myself as, well, and by the way, we are emotional beings, so we do feel what others feel. It's kind of part of our biology. So, getting swept up in somebody else's moment is part of our nature. So I think just knowing that is helpful. And then I think that you need to, when you're, finished with your, listening to your spouse or whatever that moment is, to kind of have a break, do a step away from that moment and go into another moment. Doing what Sherry had mentioned before, doing a couple of deep breaths or something to just break that first scenario and enter into your second, I think can be helpful. If you're a manager who is feeling that your employees are overwhelming you, this is a new workplace that we're in. We're all working remotely. And so it might be helpful, if you haven't already, to just think about what are the norms and what are, how are we all going to engage with each other remotely? What does an open door policy mean when we're all in different locations? Or, what's working for you and what's not working for you? That can be really helpful, I think, conversation-wise, in just understanding, what's happening with your people. And then you get a chance to share what's working and not working for you. So maybe just some communication around that. Sherry, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts.
I do, Sue. Yeah, I have one, and it's really on the pragmatic side, but I've had a lot of success with it. I think in addition to spouses who might be struggling with work and managers with people who report to him, many of you may be dealing with children who are home as well. And that's where I've really seen the heightened need in my own home. And the answer I would give to all three, which is, as I said, just very pragmatic, is very careful scheduling of these discussions. And I do that in my own home, where it's a recognition and an understanding what the feelings are. How about we set aside some time and it's scheduled very specifically, where the focus is going to be on what the other person needs from you and is dealing with, rather than it seeping in throughout the day. Perhaps if you're working from home and your spouse is out of work right now, it would be very easy to interrupt your workday randomly. So maybe that's scheduling the specific time where you can be fully present, fully focused, emotionally supportive, and tackle it head on rather than having it just seep in randomly.
That's great. That's really great. Thanks, Sherry.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you. Another question that came in, and this deals specifically with, I think, a lot of what we're all experiencing. Many of us are still under the work from home orders, and we're all meeting via Zoom or via conference calls. And this question is, how can we be more aware of how we are affecting others' emotions, as well as be able to understand what others are feeling when so much of our interaction is just through technology right now? It's through Zoom. It's through a phone call. So maybe you can't even necessarily see somebody's face, but you can only hear their voice. Which one of you would like to tackle this question?
Kate,
I'll start. Okay, go ahead, Sue.
I'll start with a very simple one, and I'll just say this. It's such a simple thing, but I think no one is a mind reader, and it's totally okay to ask. Just ask how people are feeling and doing. And when you do that, don't do it in passing, but make some time to, assume that somebody's going to be talking for a couple of minutes about it, and then that way you won't guess. I don't know.
I absolutely agree. No, I absolutely agree, Sue. I think there's the heightened need for questions right now. Obviously, if you have the opportunity to see people, take it. I know a lot of people want to hide from the screen, and we facilitate virtually all the time. So I know sometimes it's great just to want to hide and be in your hoodie sweatshirt. But any opportunity that you do have to see people, embrace it. And then, as Sue says, ask more questions, check in with people. You'd be surprised how much trust it builds when you actually take the time to ask instead of trying to guess.
Yeah.
Great, thanks so much. And another question is, once you've made it through the initial stage of feeling overwhelmed and you have a handle on your emotions, what are the next steps in terms of actually getting productive and motivated? Great question.
Kate, I'll take this one. It's kind of a large question that is a big topic that we obviously don't have time for in the few minutes that we have left, but I can answer it kind of a short answer and then also give you a resource if you want to look for more. Because motivating through change and distraction is all about establishing good habits. So it goes back to what we mentioned earlier about starting with small steps. You're going to get through the distraction if you think very small steps that will move you in the positive direction, that are manageable and aren't too much to take on. That's how we change our habits, is through disciplined practice of small steps. We do, however, have a recent article that we've written that's looking at the strategies that both astronauts and endurance athletes use to motivate themselves through times of change. And that's going to give even more information on how to be productive after you kind of navigate through that initial overwhelm. So Kate, you already did it, Kate. You read my mind. So if you'll see in the chat right now that Kate put up the link to that great resource. So any of you who have this question and it goes deeper than the time we have, you might want to check that out because it'll provide some more answers for you.
Yeah.
Great, thanks so much, both Sherry and Sue. We are coming up right at about the 45-minute mark, so I do want to respect everybody's time today. I'm sorry we couldn't get through all of the questions, but we will certainly be reading through them, and somebody from TalentSmart can certainly reach out to you. Again, you will receive a recording of the webinar in about 1 hour in your email that you registered with, so feel free to share that recording link with your colleagues. We'll also be posting the recording of the webinar on talentsmart.com, right on our website. So feel free to visit the webinar section right on talentsmart.com, and you can certainly get the link there, and feel free to share it with your family members, your colleagues at work. I definitely think that all of us could really find these 3 EQ strategies certainly helpful especially during challenging times like this. Before I do close today's webinar, again, as I said, you will have a survey pop up once we close out. We do appreciate that feedback. Sue and Sherry, are there any closing thoughts you would love to share with our attendees today before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I would just like to thank everybody for coming out. And my one thought is that this really is a conscious choice. So I think, there are a couple of ideas, but they are a choice that you have to remember and kind of work on practicing. But you can get there. These can certainly be very helpful.
Absolutely, Sue. And the only thing I will add is just a reminder to everyone that, you know what, you're not alone. We're all going through it. We all have to make these efforts, and we're in it together. So thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for attending. As I said, keep an eye out for that survey that will pop up momentarily, as well as the recording via email. And we hope you all stay strong, especially during this challenging time. And we hope you have a great remainder of your morning, your afternoon, or your evening, everyone. Take care.